Hello, everybody. Raven Knight here. Oh, man, I'm so excited. Today, guys, we are starting our Bible study series on the book of Jonah. I am so very excited to dive into this. This is going to be a very fun series for me, and I hope it's going to be fun for you guys, too. I've spent a lot of the last few years of my life making very difficult decisions. Like, where will I work? How will I spend my money? Is this activity worth my time? To quote Ursula from Disney's The Little Mermaid, life's just full of tough choices. Words of wisdom right there from a octopus sea witch, and ones that I've learned to appreciate. And the truth is, guys, that oftentimes in our lives, God gives us a choice. And it's the same choice every time, even if it's packaged a little differently each time. And the choice is this. I want you to remember this. When God gives us a direction, do you go or do we say no? Do we go or do we say no? And as much as I'd love to sit here and tell you that I always respond with a hearty go, I got to be honest and admit that there were times that I have said no to God. And I'm never proud of it when I do. And I think that's because all of us at one point or another were not at all excited about what God was asking us to do. Like I said, today we're starting a series on the life of the prophet Jonah, and I'm very excited to get into this because Jonah is a man who very much is made famous because when God gave him the choice of go or no, Jonah said no, and he had to deal with the consequences. Now, some of you today might be dealing with the consequences of saying no to God. Some of you might be facing the choice of go or no right now, and you're struggling with coming to terms with it. If you are either one of these people, I want you to know how happy I am that you're here to listen to this today, because over the next few weeks, we're going to be breaking down the book of Jonah and all that Jonah went through, and you're going to learn some incredible things. So go ahead and turn to Jonah. Jonah is one of the minor prophets of the Bible. You're going to want to go past Obadiah. It's going to be near the end of the Old Testament. You're going to want to get to Obadiah, and then right before Micah, you want to. It's a very small book of the Bible. In fact, believe it or not, just like Ruth, which is the last book of the Bible we went into, it's only 4 chapters long. But just like Ruth, it is filled with powerful and important themes for us to take away, such as God's sovereignty, God's compassion for us, repentance, and, of course, I think the big one, second chances. Now, today, I don't want to go too deep into the text just yet. Instead, I want to paint you a picture of what we're going to be reading and why it's so significant. I want you to know who Jonah is, what God has called him to do, and why his character often rubs us the wrong way. First of all, before we get too deep into things, I think we need to address the elephant in the room, or perhaps the giant fish in the room. Many of you may be hearing this topic now, and you heard that we're going into Jonah, and already you're thinking, Raven, this is mythological nonsense. This is Old Testament fairy tale. This is a story about a dude getting swallowed by a great fish and then being spat up 3 days later. That is a cool little fairy tale for kids, but come on. How can you teach us this and expect us to take it seriously? Well, I want to take that and I want to drop a little information on you that might blow your mind. All of Scripture, from the very beginning to the end, is built around miracles. We read at the very start of the Bible that God created the heavens and the earth. We read about in the New Testament about how Jesus died on the cross out of love for us, taking our sins upon himself and then resurrecting and ascending into heaven to prepare a place for us, and then that he'll return one day in power to bring salvation to his children. All of that is a far greater miracle than one big fish swallowing a dude and spitting him up 3 days later. The very message of the gospel in itself is the greatest miracle of all, and if we are prepared to accept that unbelievable truth, then why can't we accept this? If we are willing to accept that unbelievable truth, why can't we accept this? I once heard a theologian say that when it comes to Jonah, people get so distracted by the great fish, they do not see the great God. They get so distracted by the great fish in the story, they lose sight of the great God behind it. And here's the craziest part. You want to know the craziest part about all of it? We do only think about the great fish, right? That's what we all think about. But the great fish is only a very small portion of Jonah's life. It only takes up the first 2 chapters of Jonah, and it's only mentioned in a few notes. There is far more to Jonah's experience than just that fish, and to ignore all of that is to ignore some very important messages God has for us. Now, this book, to give you some history on it, can be dated back to around 785 to 760 BC. Now, during this time period, Israel's largest enemy was the Assyrian Empire, where Nineveh was the capital city. Now, to say that Nineveh was a bad place is kind of like saying the beach is a little bit sandy. You're not wrong when you say it, but you haven't quite gotten the full picture. If you skip ahead just 2 books of the Bible, you actually get an outline of some of what Nineveh was up to. We read that they were a city of cruelty, of idolatry, of murder, of lies, of treachery, of social injustice. They're rebellious, cruel, and destructive people. And if you dig a little deeper, you learn that they would cut the noses and ears off their prisoners to maim them for life. They would cut off the heads of their enemies and leave piles of heads outside the city gates. What a nice little welcome mat that is. They would skin enemies alive and hang the skin as trophies. They practiced temple prostitution, held child sacrifice and infanticide, and were fully open to abortion practices. Rape was common, as was sorcery, witchcraft, and we even get mentions of the seduction of nations. They were even called brutal eye gougers, implying they plucked the eyes out of their prisoners, foes, or enemies. You know how Ben Kenobi in Star Wars said Mos Eisley Spaceport is the most wretched hive of scum and villainy? That's because he hadn't been to Nineveh. And the entire short book of Nahum is dedicated to God's rage and judgment towards Nineveh. Guys, it's brutal. Sometime go give the reading of Nahum in the Bible a quick read and see just how furious God was with this city. Yeah. So saying that Nineveh was a bad place isn't quite getting the point, I would say. It was one of the most wicked places to be in the world, and they were an enemy of Israel. So with that understanding, maybe the first 3 verses of Jonah will make some sense to you guys. Let's read Jonah 1 through 3. Jonah 1 through 3 reads, "The word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai. Go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because its wickedness has come up before me." But Jonah ran away from the Lord and headed for Tarshish. He went down to Joppa, where he found a ship bound for that port. After paying the fare, he went aboard and sailed for Tarshish to flee from the Lord. Well, I guess we can kind of understand that. Why? I mean, guys, I'm about to blow your mind with this one, I guess, but do you want to know one of the reasons so many people don't like Jonah? Because deep down, he's just like us. He is fearful, he's selfish, he's spiteful, he's egotistical. Jonah's entire testimony can be summed up as, maybe if I do this, I can avoid God's call. Or maybe if I do that, I can avoid God's call. In chapter 1 alone, he tries to avoid God by running away to Tarshish. Then when that doesn't work, he tries to kill himself to avoid doing what God wants. Then when that doesn't work, he begrudgingly does as God asks, and then sulks about it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's backtrack to what we've just read about Jonah and his answer. So God has given Jonah the choice between go or no. Remember, we talked about that at the beginning? I want you to go to Nineveh. And Jonah said no. It's very clear he chose no. Now, why did he choose no? Well, because he hates Nineveh. And, hey, we just talked about how awful Nineveh was. He has good reason to hate Nineveh, I would think. He doesn't want to go because he doesn't want to save them. Let's pause on that point. Jonah doesn't want to save Nineveh. See, what is God asking Jonah to do? Go to Nineveh and preach to them. Preach to them. You are my prophet. Preach to the people of Nineveh. Give them my good news. Tell them to repent so that they may be saved. Jonah says, no way. He doesn't think they deserve redemption of God. And we'll go into that more later in the series because Jonah admits this in the 4th chapter of the book. But isn't that fascinating? Guys, I think there's a message in there for us. Think about this. Jonah was first mentioned in the Bible in 2 Kings 14:25, and he was instrumental in guiding King Jeroboam. This guy was a known prophet. He was noted as a well-known man of God. He should be the face of godly obedience. But here he is, so upset about the idea of saving Nineveh that he's running the other way. Tarshish is on the other side of the world. He wants to get as far away from this idea as possible because he cannot fathom the idea of saving these people. How many of you have felt that way about someone else? How many of you, if God told you to do something for someone else, would run the other way? Which is where we get our first point that I want to touch on today. There are 3 points that I want to take from this. Point number 1. When you reach the crossroads of go or no, God will often call you towards something that doesn't make sense. When you reach the crossroads of go or no, God will call you towards something that doesn't make sense. Guys, one of the biggest lies you'll ever hear as a Christian is that as soon as you accept Christ, he's going to make all your dreams come true. He's going to answer all your prayers with a big old yes, sir, and you will never have a hardship again. And if you do have hardship, it's obviously because you're a sinner and you upset God somehow, and now you're paying for it. Guys, this is a lie straight from the pits of hell. And it destroys young Christians as they're coming up in the faith. In your walk with God, God is often going to call you to do something, or he's going to put you in a situation that does not make sense. Whether it's a doctor's office result that shocks you, you lose a job, you lose a loved one, or you suffer a financial hardship. All too often, we look at God when these things happen and go, God, this makes no sense. And you can bet Jonah thought, God, this makes no sense. You want me to go where? God, you know what Nineveh's like. They don't deserve redemption. They don't deserve forgiveness. They are our enemy. And so Jonah said no. And some of you are saying that to God right now. Right now in your life, you are telling God no. Theologian J.D. Greer said, "You are never farther from God than when you are close to God and say no." I love that line. Can I read it again? You are never farther from God than when you are close to God and say no. Sometimes we can be walking right in lockstep with God, but when we say no, it propels us downward. And that can be a very dark direction. So why do it? Why say no? Because start working on the delusion that we know better than God, and that's where you end up. What God is doing to us doesn't make sense. What he's asking doesn't make sense. So clearly God doesn't know what's best for us. See, I know what's best, and I'm going to hop a boat to the farthest, fastest way to get out of here. That is what we think in our minds. It comes from a selfish desire to do things our own way, and when we start thinking about doing things our own way, we start thinking, I know better than God. Now, if I'm not a Christian, if I'm not following God in the first place, it's easy to say no to God because I already don't have a relationship with God. But if I have a relationship with God and I say no to God at that point, I have no excuse. I know God, I claim to respect God, and yet I still say, God, what you're asking doesn't make any sense to me. I'm going to do things my way, not your way, and I'm going to go the complete opposite direction. And it's a dangerous road, which leads to the second point I want to make. Point number 2, when you reach the crossroads of go or no, you will find easy access to rebellion waiting for you. When you reach the crossroads of go or no, you will find easy access to rebellion waiting for you. Do you see how easy it was for Jonah to find a way out? It only took him one verse. He ran to the port, found a ship headed for Tarshish, a city far away from Nineveh, paid the fare, got on board, and he was off. It was easy to do. And the enemy will always give you an easy way out of God's plan because he wants you to get out of it. And if you think it was easy for Jonah to find a boat back then, just look at how easy we have ways out now. Here's one you might find familiar. Okay, so let's say you're laying in your bed, right? It's late at night, and you're kind of restless. You're worked up. You're stressed. You're nervous. You just cannot sleep. You got a lot on your heart and mind. You can't pass out. Well, look what's right next to your bed. a smartphone. Nothing wrong with picking that up and checking a few messages, Maybe surf a little bit of TikTok, watch a YouTube video maybe. Maybe you could scroll to a website you think no one will see. Maybe you'll send a message to that woman or man you promised your spouse or family you'd never talk to again. No one will see, no one will know. It's all right. The phone's right there. Any of that sound familiar? Oh, it does to me. That's a really easy way to say no to God. Here's another one. You're at work or school, right? You see someone stumble, they screw up or they make a mistake, and you could help them until you realize that this person who stumbled is someone you've disagreed with and argued with in the past. Well, that's kind of convenient, isn't it? You don't need to help them up. In fact, you kind of like that he's screwed up. You know how to help him, sure, but why should you? In fact, look what you have in your pocket, that phone again. Why don't you take a picture of their screw up? Ooh, let's put that on social media while we're at it. All of your friends will get a real kick out of this. Let's have some fun at this guy's misery. Do you see how easy it is to rebel? To say no? To walk away from God's will and God's compassion? It is so easy. It is so easy, and we do it constantly. Because quite often we're put in situations where God is saying, will you do my will or not? And we immediately say, hold on, I know best. And there is an easy way to do it. Because the devil, the enemy, wants you out of God's will badly, so he's going to give you opportunities to get out of it. So before we all start pointing fingers at Jonah and saying, what a fool he is, how disobedient Jonah is, let's pause a second and recognize he's just doing what we do all the time, taking the easy way out. I'm not saying what he did is good, far from it, but it's very easy for us to look at Jonah and go, what an idiot, what a jerk, what a fool. But we do just as bad, just as often. Which leads to the last point I want to make. When you reach the crossroads of go or no, you can run, but you cannot outrun God. When you reach the crossroads of go or no, you can run, but you cannot outrun God. I remember one time I was babysitting a neighbor's little girl. She was about 2 years old, I think. She was still very much a toddler. Her parents were going out to some party or other, and I was asked to watch her, but, get pizza, make sure she gets a bath, put her to bed at 8:30. Sweet kid. Loud, but sweet. Well, bath time comes, right? And I call and say, oh, come on, let's get your bath. The first thing she does is squeal and try to run away because she doesn't want a bath right now. She's just eating pizza. She's in full play mode. She wants to run. She wants to crawl under the sofa. She wants to mess with the dog. So she runs. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen a toddler try to outrun a college-age young man, but they don't got a prayer. You can't help but laugh at it. Where are you going? What's your plan? You got a getaway car waiting outside? Of course I caught her. I let her think she could get away for a minute before I caught up. And then, hauled her up to the bathroom, and she was laughing and carrying on the whole way, because to her it's a game. But there's a lesson in that moment. I can't help but think that's how God views it when we try to run from him. What the heck are we trying to do? Where do we think we're running? How far do we honestly think we'll get? It is inevitable that God will catch up to us. One of the other lies we can tell ourselves is that we can get away from God. One of the biggest lies we tell ourselves is that, if I just do, remember that example that I told you, you're in your room in the dark, you got your smartphone out and you decide to go to a website you don't think anyone will see. You think God doesn't see it? You think God doesn't know? God didn't just suddenly put the wool over his eyes and go, oh, I didn't see that. He saw and he knows, and it hurts him. And the reality is, quite often, these things, though we think they are harmless, in the end, we will reap the punishment for them. Maybe not immediately, but in time, we're going to reap the punishment for them. One of the biggest things that I hear from a lot of people who want to criticize Christians or criticize faith is they say that, God is evil or wrong because of his punishments. If God really loves us, why would he let us suffer hardship? Here's my response to that. Did we choose go or no? If we chose go, then yes, we may experience hardship, but God will see us through to the other side because there is nothing in his plan that will not allow us to see his will fulfilled. If we choose no, not only are we not fulfilling God's will, we're probably going to suffer along the way because we're no longer acting in accordance to it. Here's the reality. In life, there is suffering. That's something we can't avoid. We live in a fallen world that has all but rejected God, so suffering is going to be a part of our world's existence. That is the nature of things. That is what happens when we choose to abandon God. When we walk with God, we can't avoid some suffering, but at the very least, it is for God's purposes, God's will, and God's benefit, which also comes back to our benefit. When we walk against God, when we walk away from God, what protection from God are we supposed to expect? Do you expect God to just hold your hand even when you clearly say don't do it? It's kind of like walking with a little kid and you want to hold their hand and say, nah, I've got it. Well, if that kid stumbles and falls, they can't blame you for not holding their hand. When I was a very little kid, I went with my family to a poultry festival. Long time ago, I was a little kid. My dad wanted to hold my hand, but I was a big boy. I said, no, I don't need you to hold my hand, Dad. I got this. I'm good. I'm fine on my own. So I didn't hold his hand. I got distracted by something and I wandered off to go look at it. I don't even remember what I was distracted by. That's how fleeting it was. Like, I don't even remember what it was. But then when I turned around, Dad was gone. I panicked and I wandered around the festival for a while wondering where Dad and Mom had gone. Eventually, a police officer found me and took me to them. Thank goodness. But I think that's a perfect example of what happens when we decide no to God. I don't even remember what I was distracted by. And I think that's a great example of sin. Sometimes the sin is so meaningless, I don't even remember what I sinned or why it was so important at the time. At the time, it probably meant nothing, but it was a fleeting little distraction. I looked away and suddenly turned around. Where is God? Where is my dad? Where is the person who was supposed to keep me safe? Why on earth did I decide not to hold his hand? Why on earth did I decide that I didn't need his help? Why did I say no instead of go? Jonah's story is the story of a prophet who said no to God, thought he could get away, and realized that he was entirely lost the whole way. And at the end of the day, God will catch up. For good and bad. Bad because we're going to have to suffer a little bit of punishment for walking away. But good because it means that once God catches up, he can redirect us. One of the things that we don't often think about with God, we're quick to think about his punishment. We're quick to think about, like, his wrath. Oh, God will bring wrath upon the sinner. We love to think about that. But something we don't often think about when it comes to God is his patience, his love, his forgiveness. We don't often talk about that because a lot of people don't want to think about that. It's a lot easier to think about God as something else. It's a lot easier to paint our own labels on God, but here's the reality. God is a God of justice, but he's also a God of forgiveness. So when I tell you that we can run, but we cannot outrun God, I don't want you to just look at that as a subject of fear of, oh no, God's going to get me. God's going to get me. I've been screwing up and he's going to get me. I want you to also understand that as a message of salvation. We can run away from God. God can always catch up. Some time ago, and I'll wrap up on this, we did a series on the story of Esther, right? One of the cool things about the book of Esther is that God's name is not mentioned once in the book. So you might think, well, God has no place in it. God isn't mentioned. God will always be present for those who have faith in him. It does not matter how far we go. It does not matter what situation we're in. You got to think about Esther's situation too. She was in a harem of women. And if she did not win the king's favor, she was just going to end up another concubine. Another woman merely meant for the sexual pleasure of the king. It's got to be one of the darkest, most difficult places you can be in. And I'll bet you she thought to herself, God, you were calling me to go or no. What am I supposed to do here? What am I supposed to do here? And then when she becomes queen and finds out that her people are in danger, go or no? Go or no? Well, if I say go, I could get killed. Go or no? Guys, I'm willing to bet money right now. In fact, I'll bet my whole salary. I'll bet every dime in my bank account that some of you watching are at that point right now, or have been at that point where God said go or no. Some of you have definitely said no. I've said no. I think it is human nature to want to do things our own way, to think we know better than God. Some of you may say, hey, you know what? I want to go, but I'm confused. I don't know what this will look like, and I'm scared. And I understand that too. As we go through the book of Jonah, we're going to talk a lot about Jonah. We're going to talk about what it looks like to say go and no. But most importantly, we're going to talk about salvation and second chances. Because if there's one thing we can learn from Jonah more than anything, it is salvation and second chances. Guys, I'm so excited to go into this with you. Really looking forward to it. I hope you guys enjoyed this first video, this first session on Jonah. Look forward to seeing you next time, and I will see you in that video. Take care.